There is a particular kind of silence that precedes a man like Alex Baker. Not the soft, drowsy silence of early mornings before a city wakes. Not the comfortable hush of libraries and rain-soaked afternoons. No. The silence that came before Alex was the kind that made shoulders stiffen and keyboards click faster, the kind born of instinct and mild collective dread. 37 people in our open-plan office, and every single one of them developed a sixth sense for detecting his approach. Someone would look up, then another. Then a quiet ripple, like wind flattening grass before a storm. And by the time the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor, the entire bullpen had recalibrated itself. Backs straighter, voices lower. A subtle, almost imperceptible performance of productivity. I noticed it on my very first day. I noticed him on my first day too, though for entirely different reasons. My name is Les Welch, and I arrived at Callaway and Marsh Communications precisely 12 minutes early on a Monday in late autumn, carrying a tote bag that was slightly too stuffed, wearing a jacket that was slightly too new, and projecting the specific energy of someone who had practiced their relaxed but competent expression in the bathroom mirror for the better part of a weekend. I introduced myself to the receptionist. I filled out the security form in my neatest handwriting. I was escorted to the 14th floor by a cheerful HR coordinator named Dana, who talked fast and smiled wide and told me 3 times that I was going to love it here. The bullpen was warm and smelled of printer toner and someone's microwaved oatmeal. I was halfway through my introductory tour when the elevator dinged. The silence fell. Dana kept talking, but I had already stopped listening. Not because I was rude, because something shifted in the air, the way it shifts before thunder, and I turned to look without entirely meaning to. Alex Baker walked in. He was tall. Not in any theatrical way, just genuinely, quietly tall, with the kind of build that suggested he had once been an athlete and had since redirected that discipline towards something equally demanding. Dark coat. Dark hair, pushed back from his face in a way that managed to look effortless and deliberate at once. Sharp jaw. Eyes that moved across the room like a sweep of a lighthouse beam, illuminating everything, resting on nothing. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and a single black coffee in his other hand, and he moved through the bullpen the way a current moves through water, without apology, without urgency, and completely indifferent to the disruption it caused. He did not say good morning to anyone. He did not nod or wave or do any of the small social performances that office life generally demands. He simply moved through the space, sat down in the corner office, whose glass walls I now noticed framed him like a portrait, and opened his portfolio. "That's Alex Baker," Dana said, her voice dropping half a register. "Senior Creative Director. He's—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Very focused." "Very focused," I repeated. "He's brilliant," she added quickly. "The clients love him. His campaigns are. He really is exceptional at what he does." I understood what she wasn't saying. You could hear it clearly in the spaces between her words, in the slight widening of her eyes, in the careful diplomacy of her adjective choices. Alex Baker was brilliant and cold, and probably made at least one person cry per fiscal quarter, and the office had long since made its collective peace with this. I looked at him through the glass. He was already reading something, his brow slightly furrowed, one hand wrapped around his coffee cup. He had not looked up once since sitting down. He would not look up, I sensed, until he was good and ready. And when he did, it would not be to perform warmth he didn't feel. Something about that, the absolute refusal of performance, struck me oddly, not as cold, as honest. I turned back to Dana. "And my desk?" She smiled, relieved that I had moved on. "Right this way." My desk was not near his office. It was in the middle of the bullpen, tucked between a senior copywriter named Priya, who had enormous headphones and a collection of succulents, and a junior art director named Marcus, who communicated primarily in raised eyebrows and was refreshingly good at his job. Over the following days, they became my de facto guides to office culture, and through them I learned the unofficial curriculum, who made the best coffee runs, which conference rooms had faulty mic setups, when the kitchen would have free pastries, and, of course, the complete mythology of Alex Baker. He fired someone for using Comic Sans in a client deck, Marcus told me, not with horror but with a kind of reverence. He once sat through a 2-hour presentation without saying a single word, Priya offered, not removing her headphones, and at the end just wrote 3 words on a post-it and left it on the presenter's keyboard. What 3 words? Start over, completely. That's 2 words and an adverb. It's the adverb is what killed him. I laughed, but later, crossing the kitchen to refill my water bottle, I passed the open door of Alex's office and I glanced in without meaning to. And I saw him at his desk with his sleeves rolled up and his head bent over a layout, and there was something so utterly, genuinely absorbed about his posture, something so free of any audience. Awareness, that I found myself slowing down without realizing it. He looked up. Our eyes met for approximately 2.5 seconds. He looked back down. I kept walking. My heart, inexplicably, was beating slightly faster than it had been a moment before. I told it to stop being dramatic and went back to my desk. The coffee started on a Wednesday. Or, no, let me be more careful. What I noticed on a Wednesday was the coffee. What actually started was something I wouldn't be able to name for a long time. Something that had probably begun the moment the elevator opened and the office fell silent, and I turned to look, and found him already moving through the world like he owned the physics of it. But the coffee. Yes, Wednesday, my 3rd day. I was at my desk early, still in the phase of proving myself, where arriving before your actual start time felt important, when the elevator opened and Alex walked in. He was carrying 2 cups, his usual black from the place downstairs, and a second cup, cardboard sleeve and lid and everything. He moved through the bullpen with his usual lighthouse efficiency, and then he stopped. Beside my desk, I looked up. He set the second cup down in front of me without a word. Without a smile, without a nod, without any of the social apparatus that usually accompanied an act of this kind. Just placed it down, met my eyes for a half second, and kept walking. I stared at the cup. Steam curled from the opening in the lid. A chai latte, oat milk, no sugar, exactly what I had ordered loudly and specifically at the coffee cart on the ground floor lobby on Monday morning, when I was still learning the building's geography and had not yet figured out that the better place was 2 streets over. Priya's headphones came halfway off one ear. Did he just, yes, has he ever? I don't know. I've been here 3 days. She pushed her headphones down around her neck entirely and turned to stare at me with an expression that managed to be both entirely calm and somehow seismic. Les, in 4 years, I have never seen that man bring anyone anything. I looked down at the coffee. It was still warm. The label on the sleeve confirmed it. Chai latte, oat, no sugar. He had remembered, or noticed, or both. Maybe he was just being welcoming, I said. New employee and all. Priya put her headphones back on. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyebrow was saying everything that needed to be said. I drank the coffee. It was, objectively, the best chai latte I had ever had. The place downstairs was not the place I had ordered from on Monday, which meant he had gone somewhere else, entirely specifically, to get this particular drink, and that thought sat in my chest like a small, warm coal that I absolutely refused to make anything of. It was probably nothing. It was probably a one-time thing. On Thursday morning, another cup appeared on my desk. Same drink, same wordless placement, same 2-second eye contact, same brisk continuation of his morning. On Friday, a third. By the following Monday, the entire 14th floor had noticed, and I had become, without seeking it, the most interesting person in the office. Here is the thing about Alex Baker that nobody talked about, but everyone understood. His coldness was not cruelty. This distinction mattered. It mattered enormously. He was precise. He was demanding. He did not laugh at things that weren't funny. He did not offer reassurance to work that didn't deserve it. He did not perform enthusiasm or camaraderie or any of the social lubricants that keep offices moving in their particular grooves. He held a standard, and the standard was high, and it was the same for everyone, himself most of all. And if that standard made people uncomfortable, he seemed to regard that discomfort as their problem to resolve rather than his burden to soften. But he wasn't cruel. I watched him in those first weeks, the way you watch something you're not entirely sure how to classify, with careful, sideways attention. I watched him in team meetings where he was spare and precise, asking questions that cut directly to the issue, offering feedback that was blunt but technically exact, never attacking the person, only ever engaging the work. I watched him in the hallway, where he moved without small talk, but also without disdain. I watched him in the kitchen, where he made his own coffee when the good machine was available and simply waited when it wasn't, without complaint, without performance. He moved through the world at his own internal temperature, and the world could adjust or not, and he was equally indifferent to both outcomes. There was one afternoon, about 3 weeks in, when a junior designer named Olivia presented a campaign concept to the creative team. She was newer than me, barely a month in, and she was terrified, visibly terrified, the way you can see terror in someone's hands even when their voice is holding steady. The concept was not bad. It was actually, in its instincts, quite good. Undercooked in execution, imprecise in some of its visual logic, but the seed of something real was there. Alex sat through the presentation without expression. When it ended, the room held its breath. He said, "The core idea is strong. The execution hasn't caught up to it yet. Take another week, fix the hierarchy, rethink the typography in section 3, and come back." That was all. He moved on. Olivia sat down with the particular posture of someone who had been braced for a blow and received a hand instead. Not warmth, exactly, not effusive praise, but recognition, honest recognition, from someone who clearly gave it sparingly, and for that reason it meant something. I thought about that later, at my desk, staring at my screen. The coffee cup was in the recycling. Its replacement would arrive tomorrow morning. I had, by then, stopped telling myself it was nothing. It was obviously something. I just didn't know what, and I was not the kind of person who rushed to label things, especially when the thing in question involved a man I worked for in an adjacent capacity, who had so far communicated with me almost exclusively through silent coffee delivery and the occasional glance that I could not read with any confidence whatsoever. Priya, as though she had been reading my thoughts, which, over time, I came to suspect she could, appeared at my elbow with a mug of green tea and the expression of someone about to dispense wisdom. "You should know," she said, settling on the edge of my desk, "that in 4 years he has never, to my knowledge, dated anyone from the office. Never shown interest in anyone from the office. Never given anyone from the office the time of day, socially, beyond what the work required." "I appreciate the briefing," I said. "I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just giving you context." "Context," I repeated. "Context," she confirmed, and sipped her tea and went back to her desk. I turned back to my screen. My cursor blinked at me in the patient, non-committal way of someone who has all day and no opinion. I thought about the coffee, about the precision of the order. Oat milk, no sugar, chai, remembered from a single loud lobby moment and reproduced every morning without fail, without reference, without asking if it was still what I wanted. About the way he placed it down. Never from a distance, always close, always centered on my desk, always with the lid opening angled toward me so I could drink from it without adjusting. Small things. Terribly small things. But nobody had ever accused Alex Baker of doing anything without intent. The first time we actually talked, really talked, past the professional exchanges that our occasional overlapping work required, was in the elevator. Or, more precisely, in the elevator stopping between floors during a power surge that lasted approximately 8 minutes and 20 seconds, which I know because I counted them. I had been working late. This was not unusual. I had been throwing myself into the job with the specific energy of someone determined to prove they belonged somewhere. Alex had apparently also been working late, which was, by all accounts, entirely usual. We entered the elevator together at 9:47 in the evening, on a Thursday, and the building made a brief, apologetic sound, and then everything stopped. Emergency lighting clicked on, a low amber that made the small space feel like the inside of something organic, something alive. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I was intensely aware of his presence beside me, not uncomfortably, but in the way you are aware of heat, or weather, or any environmental fact that changes the nature of a space. "It'll reset," he said. His voice, in the quiet, was different than in meetings. Meetings, he was clipped. Functional. Every word doing a job. In the elevator, at nearly 10 at night, with emergency lighting and stopped machinery, his voice was just lower. More itself. "I know," I said. "Old building. You've been in it before?" "I've worked in old buildings before. They do this." A pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Where?" I turned slightly to look at him. He was looking at the doors, but there was an attentiveness in his posture that I recognized. The same quality he had when reading layouts, when listening to presentations he found worth his attention. "Agency in the West End," I said. "Before that, a production company in a converted warehouse. Beautiful space, absolute nightmare of infrastructure." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, exactly. An acknowledgement of one. "Why did you leave them?" The question was direct. No social scaffolding, no softening. Just the question. I considered my answer with equal directness. "The production company closed. The agency, I outgrew it, I think. Or, it didn't have room to grow the way I needed. It's hard to tell which from inside." He was quiet for a moment, usually both. I looked at him again. "Is that what happened with wherever you were before here?" Another pause, this one longer. I thought he might not answer. He struck me as someone who parsed very carefully what he chose to share and with whom, and I was not sure I had yet qualified for this particular disclosure. "Yes," he said finally, "both." We stood in silence for a moment. It was not uncomfortable. That surprised me. I had expected his proximity in an unstructured social moment. The elevator between meetings, the kitchen at a mutual coffee stop, to be the awkward, effortful thing it apparently was for most of his coworkers. Instead, it was just quiet. His silences, I was beginning to understand, were not hostile. They were simply the natural habitat of someone whose interior life was doing a great deal more than his exterior expressed. "The coffee," I said. I don't know why I said it. It came out before I'd decided to say it, which was unusual for me. I was generally a fairly deliberate speaker. He looked at me then, full on. The amber light turned his eyes a darker shade of whatever color they actually were. "What about it?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "You don't have to," I said. "Keep getting it, I mean. I'm perfectly capable of getting my own." Something moved behind his expression. "I know you are." So, he said, "I get coffee in the morning. It is not an inconvenience to get yours as well." The elevator lurched, steadied, and began moving again. The fluorescents blinked back to life with their usual aggressive whiteness. The ground floor arrived, the doors opened, and the world re-entered with its sounds and its air and its normalcy. Alex walked out without looking back. I stood in the elevator for 2 seconds longer than necessary, then followed. "I know you are." I thought about that on the walk to the parking structure. I thought about it on the drive home. I thought about it while I brushed my teeth and stared at my reflection and told myself, firmly, to get a grip. "I know you are." It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more than that. It was a refusal to position the gesture as charity, which meant it wasn't charity, it was something else. The problem was that I was very quickly developing strong opinions about what that something else was, and I wasn't sure what to do about that yet. There is a particular phase in the trajectory of this kind of feeling. The phase before you have said anything before the other person has said anything. When everything exists in the exquisitely uncomfortable territory of plausible deniability, where the entire world seems to reorganize itself around the details. Small details. The grain of a wooden desk, the sound of a specific elevator ding, the color of a cardboard coffee sleeve. Everything becomes data. Everything becomes evidence, for or against, and you sort it constantly, compulsively, in the background of every other conscious activity. I sorted, constantly. The coffee, every morning, without fail. The 2-second eye contact that preceded it. The way he sometimes paused, barely, almost imperceptibly, before walking away. One morning, the coffee arrived accompanied by a small packet of shortbread, the kind they sold at the counter of the coffee place 2 streets over, and he said nothing about it, not a word. Just set it down as though it were entirely unremarkable. I ate one piece and saved the other. I'm not proud of that. I'm also not embarrassed. In team settings, I tried not to noticed anyway, the particular quality of his attention when I presented work. He gave everyone his focus. That was professional. But there was something in the way he engaged with my contributions that felt marginally different. He asked me follow-up questions more often than others, not in a way that suggested scrutiny, in a way that suggested genuine curiosity about where I'd gone in my thinking, what had led me to a specific choice. He pushed back when he disagreed, which he did with everyone, but then he actually listened to my pushback in return, which, I gathered, watching how meetings played out, he did not do with everyone. One Tuesday afternoon, we ended up in the same conference room for back-to-back meetings that overran in one direction and started late in the other, leaving us both stranded in the glass box for 20 minutes, with nothing to fill the time except each other's company and the distant sound of the building's ventilation system. He opened his laptop. I expected him to work through the 20 minutes in silence, which would have been entirely in character and completely fine. Instead, after perhaps 3 minutes, he said, without looking up, "Your campaign pitch last week. The color language. Where did that come from?" I had pitched a campaign that used a deliberately limited, almost desaturated palette with single saturated accents. It had been a deliberate conceptual choice, meant to evoke restraint and precision for a client in the financial sector. The client's core value proposition is trust, I said. Trust reads as restraint. If everything is loud, nothing is trustworthy. The accent color is where the emotion lives, small, controlled, intentional. He was quiet. Then, most people go the opposite direction. More color, more feeling. More color can mean more noise. The feeling lands harder when there's space around it. He looked up from his laptop. The quality of his attention, fully directed, was a specific experience. It was not warm, exactly, but it was complete, and there was something in its completeness that felt, paradoxically, more intimate than warmth. "That's the right instinct," he said. I nodded. He went back to his laptop. 20 minutes. That was the whole of it. But I sat with it for the rest of the afternoon in the particular way you sit with something that confirms what you had almost allowed yourself to believe. The shift, when it came from the most ordinary possible direction. A company event. End-of-quarter drinks, held at a bar 2 blocks from the office. The kind of semi-mandatory social occasion that office culture periodically requires. And almost everyone attends with the private energy of someone completing a necessary chore. Tables of colleagues in slightly more casual than usual versions of their work clothes. The specific looseness of people who have been given permission to have a drink on the company's time. The ambient noise of 37 people trying to seem like they were having more fun than they actually were. Alex, predictably, came. He stayed 45 minutes. He spoke to the senior leadership and 1 or 2 of the senior creatives. He drank exactly 1 glass of whatever the bartender recommended, and then he left. This was, according to Marcus, his invariable pattern, except that on his way to the door, he paused at the high table where I was standing with Priya and Marcus and a junior strategist named Fen, and he said, to me specifically, not to the group, "Good work on the Arrowhead deck." Then he left. The table went very quiet. Priya made a sound. Not a word, a sound. A small, controlled, deeply informative sound. Marcus put his drink down. Fen, who had only recently joined us and was not yet fully versed in the mythology, looked around at our faces and said, "Is that not normal?" "In 4 years," Priya said, with the grave deliberateness of someone reading from a sacred text, "I have never heard him compliment someone's work at a social event. In a meeting? Yes. Directly. Privately. Probably. But not like that." I was looking at the door he had just walked through. "He didn't even say anything about the Arrowhead deck in the meeting," I said. "No," Priya agreed, "he didn't." Which meant he had been thinking about it. Outside the meeting off the clock at a bar, where he had chosen to spend 45 minutes of his limited social energy, he had been thinking about something I'd made and decided on his way out the door. That I should know. I took a very long sip of my drink. "You need to do something," Marcus said. "I don't need to do anything. Less. I work with him. He's the senior creative director. I've been here 8 weeks. Almost 10, Priya said. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I didn't answer, because the honest answer was that I didn't know yet. Or, I did know, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud, which is a different thing. But something had shifted. I could feel it. The way you feel a tide pulling sand from under your feet. Not the wave, not the drama of it, just the slow, steady, irresistible reorganization of ground. The next morning, the coffee arrived as always. But this time, when he set it down, he didn't immediately walk away. He stood for a moment, a real moment, not the brief pause I'd imagined into significance before. He stood, and I looked up, and he looked at me with that lighthouse sweep gaze and said quietly, "Are you free on Friday evening?" The bullpen existed around us. People were arriving, keyboards were clicking, the ambient noise of a morning in full swing was doing everything it usually did. Nobody appeared to be listening. Nobody appeared not to be. I said, "Yes." He nodded once. "There's a gallery opening downtown, if you're interested." There was no performance in his voice, no casual affect, no studied cool. Just the question, with all the care and all the exposure. A question like that contains when it comes from someone who does not issue questions carelessly. "I'm interested," I said, another nod. Then he walked to his office. I looked at the coffee cup. Chai latte. Oat milk, no sugar. Priya's headphones were entirely off, resting around her neck, and she was staring at her screen with the focused expression of someone doing absolutely nothing productive while processing a significant amount of information. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I drank my coffee. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. The gallery was small and serious, the kind that showed work that wasn't trying to be immediately liked, that asked something of you. Photography mostly. Long exposure landscapes where civilization had been reduced to light trails and the permanent dark. Alex moved through the space with the same quiet purpose he moved everywhere, but there was something different in it outside the office. A slight loosening, maybe. A fraction of something that hadn't had room to breathe under fluorescent lighting. We didn't talk constantly. We didn't need to. We moved through the rooms at roughly the same pace, and when one of us paused, the other paused too, and when something was worth talking about, one of us would start and the other would respond. And in between, there was the particular silence of two people who were comfortable enough with the same image to share it without filling it with words. At one point, standing before a photograph of a coastline at what must have been 4 in the morning, the horizon barely distinguishable from the sea. A single smear of lighter dark where dawn was thinking about arriving. Alex said quietly, "This is what good work feels like from inside. When you're in the middle of something that hasn't found its form yet." I looked at him, not at the photograph. "Dark and cold and not sure where the horizon is," I said, "but you know it's there." He looked at me briefly. "You can feel it." I thought about all the mornings. The elevator, the conference room, the shortbread. "Yes," I said, "you can feel it." We had dinner after. A small restaurant nearby, the kind that doesn't take reservations and has 4 items on the menu and is perfect in exactly the way that simplicity, done right, is always perfect. We sat across a small table and ate and talked, and the talking was easy. Easier than I had expected, though I had adjusted my expectations significantly by now, having had several weeks of evidence that Alex Baker's silences were not absence but preference. and that when he chose to fill them, the filling was worth it. He was precise in conversation too, but not clipped. He said things that were true, and expected them to be received as true, without apology and without the elaborate social disclaimers most people use when saying something real. He asked questions and listened to the answers with complete attention. I realized watching him across the candlelit table, someone who had decided very clearly what he valued and organized himself entirely around that decision, and what he valued was depth. Real depth. The kind that couldn't be performed or accelerated or faked. He had, it seemed, decided that I might be worth his depth. This was not a casual decision, I could tell. I felt the weight of it. "Can I ask you something?" I said, when we had been talking long enough that it felt possible. He raised an eyebrow marginally. Permission granted, the coffee, from the beginning. He looked at me. "Yes? Why, specifically?" "From the first day. You knew my order from one morning, and you just started." He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, because he was deciding how to give it. "You were new," he said. "You were doing everything right. The early arrivals, the prepared work, the appropriate assertiveness, all the things people do to prove themselves. And you were doing it well." A beat. "But you'd gotten your coffee from the lobby place on your first day, which is worse, and you obviously hadn't had time to figure out the better option yet. So it was practical." "Partly." He looked at me directly. "And partly because I noticed you the moment I walked in." There it was, clean and plain and unadorned, the way he did everything. My chest did something complicated. I kept my face calm with the specific effort of someone who has decided to match honesty with honesty. "I noticed you too," I said. The whole office went silent. "They always do that." "I know. But I didn't notice the silence first. I noticed you." Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, but real, and I was learning how to read the subtle, real things. A small softening somewhere around the eyes. An exhale that was too measured to be entirely steady. "Les," he said, and the way he said my name, unhurried, precise, like it was a word he had considered carefully, made something in me go very still and very warm at once. "Yes," I said. "I should tell you that I am not good at this." He said it without self-pity, just inventory. "Social ease is not a particular strength. I am aware that I am difficult to read and possibly difficult to be around." "You're not difficult to be around. Most people find me so. Most people experience your standards as commentary on themselves. I just think you have good standards." He looked at me for a long moment. The candle between us was doing what candles do at moments like this, which is to say everything it could with the limited vocabulary of light. "I've been bringing you coffee for 8 weeks, he said. "Almost 10, I said, smiling slightly. He looked startled for a half-second. A real surprise, unguarded, and it was so rare on that controlled face that I felt absurdly honored to have caused it. "Almost 10, he agreed, and the corner of his mouth moved, and this time it was unmistakably a smile. Small, quiet, quickly mastered, but entirely real. "So," I said, "what happens after the coffee?" He looked at me. "Whatever you want to happen." And that was that. What I want to tell you about falling in love with Alex Baker is this. It was not dramatic. It was not a revelation that struck like lightning or broke like a wave. It was more like learning a language. Gradual immersion, repeated exposure, the slow accumulation of vocabulary until one day you realize you are dreaming in the new tongue without having decided to. After the gallery and the dinner, there was another dinner, and then an afternoon in a bookshop, because I had mentioned offhandedly that I spent too much time in bookshops, and he had said, with the air of someone making a mental note, that he would like to see that. We spent nearly 2 hours in a narrow, overstuffed shop, pulling things from shelves and holding them up and putting them back, and he bought 3 books and a biography of a photographer I'd recommended, and when we left, he was carrying the bag, and he reached over and briefly once touched the back of my hand in a way that said everything words weren't yet saying. I learned him in increments. Learned that the preciseness, the high standard. The cool exterior were not armor exactly. He didn't feel the need to be protected. He simply was, as he was. But they were the shape of him. And the tenderness that existed inside that shape was more than I had expected. Not hidden, exactly, just proportioned. The same way the accent color in my campaign carried the emotion precisely because there was restraint around it. He remembered things, not performatively in the way of someone who writes reminders, just genuinely, with the total attention of someone who listens as though everything might matter. A passing reference I made to a piece of music became a playlist he assembled over a week and shared without fanfare. A restaurant I'd mentioned visiting years ago in another city turned into a reservation at a place that made something similar. For a Tuesday evening after a long workday, when he had clearly considered that I might need feeding and something beautiful. He was not effusive. He did not say many words when he could say the right few. But the right few, from him, landed with the specific weight of things that had been chosen with care. The first time he told me I was extraordinary, we were standing in his kitchen at midnight after a long evening, and he said it in the same tone he used to say the core idea is strong, which is to say the tone of someone stating a fact they have reviewed from multiple angles and confirmed. And I believed it entirely, which is something I could not always say about the prettier, louder declarations I'd received from others. In return, I learned to give him what he needed: steadiness, honesty, space without absence. He did not need to be entertained or managed or decoded. He needed someone who meant what they said, and said what they meant, who could stand comfortably in his silences, and who wasn't frightened of his standards or his edges. Someone who would push back when they disagreed, which I did, and which he respected, sometimes visibly more than he expected to. Someone who could see the tenderness under the precision and not make him feel exposed for having it. I loved him. Of course I loved him. Not gradually and then all at once, like the Hemingway line, but something stranger, consistently and increasingly, a steady building, the way a river rises with rain, unremarkably and then enormously. At the office, things were careful. Alex was meticulous about professional boundaries in a way that was both principled and almost touching. He did not change how he engaged with my work. Did not become softer in meetings or easier in feedback. If anything, he was harder on my work than before, because he knew I could take it, and I could, and the feedback was always the kind that made the work better. Nobody could say he showed me favoritism. He did not. But the coffee continued. It continued every morning, without exception, through the following months and into the next year. Through a particularly brutal deadline period in February when I was working 18-hour days. Through a week in April when I had a cold and he brought ginger tea instead, without being asked, without discussion. Through a conference in late spring where we were both traveling for the company and shared for 3 days. The quiet domestic language of two people navigating shared space. Mornings and coffee shops, and the particular shorthand that develops between people who know each other well enough to stop translating. The whole office watched him bring me coffee. They had watched it from the beginning, and they kept watching as the months turned over, and by now I believe the general office understanding was clear, though nothing had ever been announced, as nothing needed to be. Dana from HR, when she passed me in the corridor one morning after a team meeting, gave me a smile that contained the particular warmth of someone who has been quietly rooting for something from the beginning. Marcus, after almost a year, finally said it out loud, in the specific way of someone who has been holding a conclusion very tightly for a long time. "You're happy," he said. "I am," I said. Marcus searched for the word, which was unusual for him, and when he found it, it was a good one. "He's better than I expected." I thought about the gallery, the bookshop, the midnight kitchen, the ginger tea. The very first chai latte, placed with impossible precision on a desk belonging to a person he had known for 2.5 days. "He's exactly as good as I expected," I said. "Once you know how to read the signals." "What signals?" "Coffee signals." Marcus blinked. Then he nodded, with the gravity of someone who understood, somehow, everything. "There is a morning I want to tell you about, near the end of our first autumn together, which was also near the anniversary of my first day at Callaway and Marsh. I was early. Still early, though by now it was less about proving myself and more just about preferring the morning quiet, the desk before the day's noise arrived. The light at that hour was different. Softer. The city outside the 14th floor windows showed itself without its usual urgency. I was reading something, review documents, a brief, and I was not thinking about anything in particular. Or rather, I was thinking in the diffuse, associative way of early mornings when the mind moves freely between things. The elevator dinged. The office was nearly empty. There were 3 other people in the bullpen, and they were absorbed in their own mornings, their own screens. No ripple of awareness, no subtle collective recalibration. Just the elevator, just the ding, just the doors opening. Alex walked in. And even though I had watched him walk in every morning for a year, even though the sight of him had become the most ordinary part of my day, I looked up and everything settled, the way it does when something fits exactly where it belongs. He crossed the bullpen. He stopped at my desk. He placed the coffee down. Chai latte, oat milk, no sugar. The order he had never once gotten wrong. And then, instead of immediately continuing to his office, he paused. I looked up at him. He looked at me. "Good morning," he said. His voice, in the early quiet, was just itself, low and real and mine in the specific way that some things become yours, not through ownership, but through deep and repeated recognition. "Good morning," I said. He looked at me for another moment, the kind of look he gave things he found worth his full attention, the kind that meant something was actually being seen. Then he went to his office. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Outside the glass, the city moved in its morning urgency. Inside, the day was preparing to arrive. In his office, I knew without looking, he was already reading something, already in the middle of the work, the light through the glass catching the clean lines of his face. The coffee was perfect. It was always perfect. This is what I want to tell you, finally, about the whole of it. Love is not always announced. It is not always immediate or obvious or performed. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest possible increments, in an order remembered in a pause before walking away in a quiet gallery at night, in the particular steady warmth of something chosen every morning without obligation, without expectation, without anything except the simple, stubborn truth of wanting to. The whole company watched him be cold to everyone. They also watched him bring me coffee every morning without fail. Both things were true. Both things were him. And the space between them, that warm, exact, quietly extraordinary space, was where I found the truest and most lasting home I have ever known. There is something nobody tells you about being with someone who does not speak in the currency of excess. No over-declarations, no elaborate gestures for their own sake, no emotional abundance performed for an audience. Nobody tells you how completely it recalibrates your sense of scale. After a year with Alex, a year of the precise and the deliberate and the carefully chosen, I had developed a new instrument for measuring what things meant. The instrument was finely tuned. It had to be. The signals were small, and they were everything. I'll give you an example. February. 15 months in. A winter that had settled in with the specific stubbornness of winters that intend to be felt. The office was running at the particular pitch of an end-of-quarter push. Everyone tired, everyone slightly shorter fused than usual. The creative department working through lunches and into evenings with the collective grimness of a team that has committed to something and will not be the first to flinch. I had been working on a brand identity overhaul for 6 weeks. A big client, a long brief, the kind of project where you exhaust every obvious idea and then somewhere in the 4th week hit a wall you cannot immediately see around, and spend the 5th and 6th weeks convinced you never will. I was in that place, stuck in the legitimate, grinding way that creative work sometimes insists upon before releasing. Alex knew, because Alex paid attention. He didn't interfere. He knew I needed to find it myself, and he trusted me to, which was itself a gift. But he knew. One evening, quite late, I was still at my desk when most of the bullpen had gone. The overhead lights had gone to their after-hours, half-power, which made the space feel different, quieter, softer, stripped of its daytime machinery. I was staring at a layout I had rearranged 14 times and still not gotten right, and I was experiencing the specific despair of someone who can see the problem, but cannot yet see the solution. I heard the door to Alex's office open. He appeared at my desk. He looked at the screen. He did not say anything immediately, just stood beside me and looked at what I was looking at, with the same quiet seriousness he brought to anything he considered worth examining. "The weight is wrong," he said after a moment. "I know. Not wrong in what you've done, wrong in what you're trying to do with it. You're treating it as decoration. It wants to be structure." I stared at the screen. The thing I had been circling for 3 days said in 11 words. I looked up at him. "You are sometimes extremely irritating." He looked faintly, privately pleased. "I know." I turned back to the screen and started moving elements. Not from his words exactly, but from the thing his words had unlocked. The reframing, the permission to see it differently. He didn't hover. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of tea, not coffee at this hour. Instinctively, right? And set one beside me and took the other to a chair he'd pulled up at a respectful working distance. And he sat there, reading from his tablet, occasionally refilling his tea, while I worked for another 2 hours and found what I'd been looking for. At 11:45, when I sat back from the screen with the particular exhale of something finally resolved, he looked up. "Yes?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He stood, stretched, placed his teacup in the recycling, and came to look at the screen. He stood there for a long moment, reading what I'd built, and then he said, "Good." From Alex Baker, this was an aria. I knew that. I had learned to know that. "Thank you," I said, "for the tea and for the 11 words. You would have gotten there, probably by next week." The deadline was next week, he said, with a trace of something that in anyone else would have been a smirk and in him was the rarest, driest humor. "So, fine," I laughed. He looked at me with that look, the full attention one, the one that had never stopped doing something significant to my breathing, and then he said, "Come home." 2 words, quietly, simply, entirely without performance, "Come home." Because my things were at his place, had been, increasingly, for months. Because somehow, without a formal announcement or a dramatic moment or even a conversation that felt like a threshold, the threshold had been crossed. I had a drawer. I had a key. I had learned which shelf he kept the tea on, and which side of the bed the early light hit, and the fact that he read for exactly 30 minutes before sleeping and did not like to be talked to in those 30 minutes but would tolerate. Just barely a hand resting somewhere near his shoulder blade. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. "Take 10. He picked up his coat. "I'll get the car." He went. I looked at the screen one more time. The work, finally right, finished and waiting to be sent. And I thought, as I often did at moments like this, about the very first morning. The elevator opening, the silence, the lighthouse sweep of his eyes across a room that had rearranged itself around his arrival. The way I had turned to look before I meant to. His apartment was the spatial equivalent of his work. Precise, deliberate, nothing that didn't have a reason to be there, and in that reason, everything had room to breathe. High ceilings, clean lines, books arranged not alphabetically, but in a logic of his own that I had eventually cracked and was the most satisfying puzzle of my adult life. A sound system he cared about with the particular passion of someone for whom music was not background, but foreground. A kitchen that was genuinely equipped and used, because he cooked the same way he did everything, with standard, with attention, with no patience for the approximate. I had cooked in that kitchen too, by now. We had cooked together, which was its own negotiation. 2 people who both have opinions about heat levels and knife technique, finding the particular choreography of a shared space. We had burned one thing, his fault though he disputed this, and undercooked another, my fault, I admit readily, and produced through persistent collaboration a rotating repertoire of things that were reliably good, because we were both too stubborn to accept reliably mediocre and too honest to settle. That night, too late for real cooking, he made eggs. Simple, precise, exactly right. We ate at the kitchen counter because neither of us had the energy for the table, and outside the window, the city at midnight was doing what cities do: its light, its movement, its irresistible ongoing existence. And we were quiet, the comfortable quiet of people who have each other's company in the most fundamental sense, who don't need to fill it. At some point, I said, "I've been here 14 months. He looked at me. Since the job? Since the first coffee. He considered this. 15 months. Priya said almost 10 weeks when I corrected you at dinner. I'm correcting you again. You and Priya and your collective precision about time. You should appreciate precision. I do, he said, looking at me, in most contexts. I put my fork down. Something in the way he'd said that, in the softness of it, the deliberateness, settled in my chest like the last note of something long and beautiful. Alex. I love you. I know I've said it before. I'm saying it again because I want to say it in a quiet kitchen at midnight and have it be ordinary and permanent. He looked at me, full on. The private, unguarded expression he had, the one that existed behind everything else, that I had come to know the way you come to know someone's handwriting, as entirely their own and entirely for you. Ordinary and permanent, he repeated. Both. He reached across the counter and took my hand. His grip was firm and warm and entirely itself. Good, he said. One word. From him, it was everything. In the morning, as it was every morning, as it had been every morning for a year and more, there was coffee, not from the place 2 streets over. At home, he made it properly. The right water temperature, the right grind, the pour-over he'd invested in, with the same seriousness he brought to all investments that mattered. My chai was made from scratch, warming the milk carefully, the spices precise, the way I'd once described it to him offhandedly, and which he had then, apparently, committed to the same reliable archive where he kept everything worth keeping. He placed it beside me at the kitchen table, where I was reading with the same centered, considered placement, handle, angled toward me. Easy to reach, that he had used from the very first morning on the 14th floor. I looked up. He met my eyes. 2 seconds, 3, the steady, clear gaze that had never once been casual, that had always meant something real. Good morning, I said. Good morning, he said, and took his own coffee to the chair across from me and opened the book he was midway through, and the morning happened around us, light moving through the window. The city waking up outside the ordinary and permanent world, doing what it always did. In his precise, deliberate hands, his book, his coffee, his absolute and total presence. Across the table from him, me, home. This is what love looks like, I thought, when it is built from the inside out. When it doesn't announce itself but simply accumulates. When the grandest gesture is the repeated one. When the most extraordinary thing is the morning cup that appears without fail, without fuss, without anything except the quiet and certain truth that you are known, that you have been seen, that someone chose, deliberately and completely, to see you, and keeps choosing it. Every morning, without fail. I drank my chai. Outside, the autumn city moved in its gold and gray beauty. At the table, Alex turned a page. Everything was exactly as it should be. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.